The signal had been screaming into space for 4 days before anyone at the Galactic Accord did anything about it. It came from Arith IV, a Shalori farming colony near the outer belt, 140,000 people, fields of pale grain that stretch for miles, quiet little towns built close to the ground because the Shalori liked to feel the soil under their feet. None of that mattered now. The Dareth had arrived 6 days ago, and they had not come to talk. Fleet Speaker Ario of the Galactic Accord received the first SOS report on day 2. He read it, flagged it, and forwarded it to the Intervention Committee. The committee met on day 3. They discussed the matter for 11 hours. They agreed that the situation was serious. They agreed that action required a formal motion. They agreed to meet again on day 5 to vote on whether to draft that motion. The Shalori colony sent its distress call every hour, on the hour. No Accord ship moved. What the Accord did not know was that a small human relay station sat quietly at the edge of that region of space. It was low-powered. It was not on any Accord chart. The humans had placed it there 2 years ago during a surveying run, and nobody had bothered to mention it to anyone. It picked up the Shalori SOS on day 4 and bounced it across the spectrum without any filtering or delay. Captain Rowe was reviewing fuel consumption reports when the alert came in. He almost ignored it. The tone was unfamiliar, the language not human, the frequency a civilian emergency band the UHF did not normally monitor. He ran it through the translation layer anyway, mostly out of habit. The translation came back in under a second. He read it twice. Then he picked up the printed sheet, walked off the bridge, went down 2 decks and knocked on Admiral Reyes's door. She was not asleep. She was never asleep at this hour. She was sitting at her desk with a mug of something cold and a navigation report she had already read 3 times. The scar along her jaw caught the light from the desk lamp. She looked up when Rowe came in and said nothing. She just held out her hand. He gave her the sheet. She read it once. The whole thing. Every line of the translation, every coordinate, every detail Rowe had attached about the relay station and the signal age and the estimated population count of Arith IV. She set the sheet down flat on the desk. "What's the Accord status on this?" she said. "Committee review," Rowe said. "They're voting on a motion draft in about 18 hours. Reyes looked at the coordinates on the sheet. She looked at the date on the SOS. She did the math the same way Rowe had already done it, coming up with the same answer. 4 days, 140,000 people, 18 more hours of committee votes. She stood up. "Get me fleet-wide comms," she said. Rowe did not move right away. He was a careful man. It was why she liked him. "Admiral, we have no treaty obligation here. Arith IV is not a human colony. The Shalori have no mutual defense agreement with Earth. We'd be moving military assets into a region the Accord considers its own jurisdiction, unsanctioned without." "I know what we'd be doing," Reyes said. She was already pulling on her jacket. "Then why?" She picked up the sheet again and looked at it. Not at the coordinates. At the line near the top, the one the translation layer had marked as repeated. The Shalori word that appeared at the start of every hourly transmission, the one that translated simply as please. "Because they asked," she said. She walked past him and out the door. The next 4 minutes were the loudest 4 minutes UHF Anchorage Bravo had seen in 2 years. Reyes got on fleet comms and gave 3 orders: spin up drives, load ground teams, set course for Arith IV. No one questioned her. That was not how the UHF worked. Questions came after in the debrief, where everyone was still alive to have them. 14 ships began the process of pulling out of Anchorage. Engines that had been cold for weeks burned hot. Crew members who had been playing card games and watching old recordings from home pulled on their uniforms and ran to their stations. Sergeant Una, who had been doing pull-ups in the gym because she could not sleep, got the alert and dropped to the floor in mid-rep. She was in the armory in 4 minutes. At the Accord monitoring station, an analyst named Preth was halfway through his meal when his board lit up. He stared at the readout. Then he opened a priority channel to Counselor Dreth's personal comm and said the words that would wake the counselor out of the first good sleep he'd had in a week. "The humans are moving." Dreth sat up in the dark. "To where?" "Arith IV," Preth said. "Full fleet deployment. They're already out of Anchorage." There was a long silence. "How long ago did they receive the signal?" Dreth asked. Preth checked the timestamp. "Approximately 22 minutes ago." Another silence, longer this time. 22 minutes, Dreth said quietly. He was not talking to Preth anymore. He was talking to himself, running numbers in his head that did not make sense to him. The Accord had received the same signal 96 hours ago and was still drafting a motion. The humans had received it 22 minutes ago and were already gone. Dreth got out of bed and started getting dressed. Whatever happened next, he wanted to be watching. The corridor had a real name somewhere in the old survey records, a long string of catalog numbers that nobody used. Everyone just called it the corridor. It was a lane of dense debris that cut through the outer belt like a scar, full of dead rock and old wreckage from a collision event that had happened before any living species had reached that part of space. Accord navigation charts marked it in red. Accord pilots were instructed to go around it. The humans went through it. On the Accord observation vessel that had been scrambled to follow the UHF fleet, the navigator watched his screen and said nothing for a full minute. Then he turned to Fleet Speaker Ario and said, "They're entering the corridor." Ario looked at the display. "At that speed?" "Yes." Ario watched the human fleet vanish into the debris field. His own vessel sat at the edge, engines idling. He did not follow. No sane pilot followed a 14-ship military fleet into the corridor at transit speed. The rocks in there were the size of buildings. The wreckage was unpredictable. Any debris strike at that velocity would punch through a standard hull like it was paper. The humans had mapped it themselves. That was what he found out when he pulled the survey records. A single human scout vessel had gone through the corridor 6 years ago, mapping every rock, every current, every gap in the debris. They had filed the survey with their own navigation authority and apparently told no one else. They had simply known it was there, known how to use it, and saved the knowledge for a moment when speed mattered more than caution. That moment had come. The UHF fleet would reach Arith IV in 9 hours. Any Accord vessel going the safe route would take 27. Ario opened a channel to Counselor Dreth and said, in a very flat voice, "I think we may have underestimated them." Dreth was already on a separate channel, talking to Admiral Reyes. He had been trying to reach her for the last hour, and she had finally accepted the call. He was polite. He was always polite. He told her that the UHF deployment was unsanctioned, that the Dareth had not been formally designated as a treaty-level threat by the Accord, and that military action in this region without Accord authorization could damage ongoing diplomatic efforts with Dareth border factions. Reyes listened to all of it. He could tell she was listening because she did not interrupt. When he finished, she said, "We'll file the paperwork when we're done." Then she closed the channel. Dreth sat with the dead calm line for a moment. In 40 years of diplomatic work, no one had ever closed a channel on him mid-conversation. He was not sure how he felt about it. He made a note to think about it later and opened a channel to Ario instead. Inside the corridor, the UHF fleet moved like it had done this before. The navigators had the survey data loaded and were threading gaps in the debris with calm precision. The rocks outside the viewports were enormous, some of them close enough to see the texture of the surface, old gray stone pitted with craters from 1 billion years of smaller impacts. No one panicked. People had trained for this. In the ground team bay, Sergeant Una was going through the briefing she had built from everything they had on Arith IV. The colony layout, the underground shelter network, the Dareth attack pattern from the last 6 days, pieced together from the fragments in the SOS transmissions. Agricultural world, she said. Civilian population, heavy. The Dareth have been doing surface bombardment to collapse the shelter tunnels. They're not trying to kill everyone fast. They're trying to push them out into the open. Why? Someone asked from the back. Because the Dareth don't waste energy, she said. They want the colony infrastructure intact, easier to strip if the buildings are still standing. Corporal Faris was sitting near the front, running a small piece of wire through his fingers the way he always did when he was thinking. How many ground units are we looking at? 40 confirmed, probably more. Faris nodded slowly. He did not look worried. He looked like a man doing math in his head. Dr. Nell Oso was not in the briefing bay. She was 3 corridors away, in front of a logistics officer named Pell, explaining in very clear terms why she needed to be included in the ground deployment list. Pell told her the ground zone was not cleared for civilian personnel. Oso told him she was the best trauma surgeon on the fleet, and that if he sent soldiers into a bombed-out colony with a civilian medical emergency and no surgeon, he would be explaining that decision to Admiral Reyes in person. Pell updated the deployment list. The fleet came out the other side of the corridor 8 hours and 50 minutes after entering. The debris field fell away behind them. Arith IV appeared on the long-range scan, a green-brown sphere with a thin cloud layer. Around it, 6 Dareth capital ships sat in orbit, slow and heavy, moving in the methodical pattern of ships that were not expecting a fight. The SOS signal was still transmitting from the surface, weaker than before. The transmission intervals had stretched from 1 hour to 2, then to 3. Someone down there was rationing the power cell, keeping the antenna alive. Yuna looked at the scan readout and then looked at Faris. He had already put the wire away. He was checking his charges instead. Good, she thought. No time to waste. The Dareth had fought the Galactic Accord 3 times in the last decade. They knew how Accord fleets moved. They knew the opening salvo would come from long range, carefully measured, with a formal demand for withdrawal transmitted first. They knew there would be a pause while both sides assessed damage. They knew escalation happened in steps, slow and predictable, like a negotiation with weapons instead of words. The UHF fleet dropped out of transit at close range and opened fire without transmitting anything. For exactly 4 seconds, the Dareth fleet did not respond. 4 seconds was a long time in a space battle. In those 4 seconds, 2 human railgun volleys crossed the gap and hit the nearest Dareth capital ship in the engine section. The ship went dark. It did not explode. It just stopped, drifting, every system dead. Then the rest of the human fleet split. That was the part that confused the Dareth command structure most. Accord fleets held formation. It was doctrine. It was the sensible thing to do. A fleet that split was a fleet that divided its firepower, and divided firepower was weaker firepower. This was basic military logic that every spacefaring species understood. The humans did not care. 4 ships went left, burning hard around the Dareth formation's flank. 4 ships went right. The remaining 6 drove straight in, closing distance at a speed that made the Dareth targeting system scramble to recalculate. The Dareth ships began to reposition to face the incoming center group, and while they were turning, the flanking ships hit them from the sides with weapons they had not angled any armor to receive. A second Dareth capital ship lost its forward weapons array. A third took a hit to its crew section and broke formation, pulling back. The Accord observation vessel, watching from a safe distance, recorded it. Fleet Speaker Ario's tactical officer said very quietly that in 14 years of monitoring Dareth military operations, he had never seen a Dareth unit break formation under fire. Ario said nothing. He was watching the feed with the same expression he used when he was reading something he did not believe. On the surface of Arith IV, the bombardment changed pattern. Ven felt it before he understood it. The deep vibrations coming through the shelter walls shifted rhythm, closer together. The Dareth had been hitting the same zones in cycles, methodical, conserving ammunition. Now they were hitting faster, harder. Something had changed. He pulled up the antenna unit they had been keeping alive for 6 days. The power cell was at 9%. He had been rationing transmissions, sending one every 3 hours, because there was no way to know if anyone was listening and the cell would not last forever. He sent one now anyway, not the standard SOS, just a location ping, a single burst transmission as short as he could make it with their shelter coordinates. Then he went back to the 400 people sitting in the dark behind him and told them to stay calm. He was not calm himself, but someone had to say it. In orbit, the battle lasted 31 minutes. The Dareth had numbers and size. The humans had speed and the apparent willingness to take damage that would have made any rational fleet pull back and reassess. One human destroyer took a direct hit to its hull and lost 30% of its crew section. It did not retreat. It fired back with everything it had left and then positioned itself between 2 Dareth ships so they could not fire on it without hitting each other. 3 Dareth ships were destroyed. One was captured, boarded by a human team that cut through the hull with equipment that the Accord had not known humans possessed. 2 retreated. The remaining Dareth capital ship attempted to contact its ground forces and received no useful answer because the ground forces were dealing with their own problems now. Ray stood on the bridge and looked at the damage report. 1 destroyer lost. Several ships with hull damage. She read the casualty count and held it in her head for a moment, the way she always did, before setting it aside and moving to the next problem. Landing zones, she said. Her tactical officer pulled up the surface scan. Still contested. Dareth ground units are concentrated around the shelter network. We don't have a clear approach. What's the colony's secondary access system? Old drainage tunnels, pre-colony construction mostly unmapped. Mostly, Ray said. Yes. Send that to Yuna's team, everything we have. She looked at the display showing the surface coordinates. The location ping from Shelter 9 was still blinking. Someone down there had just sent it, 9% power cell or less. And get the drop pods ready. We're going in before the orbit is fully secured. Admiral, the landing zones. I know, Ray said. The people underground can't wait for the landing zones to be safe. We go now. Her tactical officer nodded once and opened the deployment channel. In the drop pod bay, the lights went red. Yuna's team was already strapped in. Faris had his eyes closed, not sleeping, just thinking. The pod around them smelled like metal and recycled air, and the particular kind of tension that comes before a door opens onto somewhere dangerous. The pod launched. Yuna watched the altimeter count down and thought about the drainage tunnels, the shelter coordinates, and the 400 people who had kept a power cell alive for 6 days because they believed someone was listening. Someone was. The pod hit the surface hard, the way they always did. Yuna was out before the dust settled, weapon up, scanning. The area was a bombed-out district 2 kilometers from Shelter 9. What had been a grain processing facility was now a spread of broken walls and twisted metal. The street beyond it no longer had a shape. It was just rubble arranged by explosion. 3 Dareth ground units were between them and the shelter. Yuna looked at the drainage map on her wrist display. The colony's original construction had used a system of wide underground channels for water management. Most of them were not on any modern map because the colony had paved over them decades ago. The humans had pulled the pre-colony survey records from a public archive, and those records showed something useful. A main drainage channel ran directly under the district, from the processing facility all the way to a secondary access point 30 meters from Shelter 9's side wall. Faris, she said, there's a basement entry point under that far structure. Get it open. Faris looked at the structure. Most of it was still standing, which meant the Dareth had not considered it a priority target. He jogged over, found the old maintenance hatch under a layer of debris, and had it open in 4 minutes using a cutting tool and what Una described as creative persuasion. They went underground. The drainage channel was wide enough to move through single file at a run. It smelled like old stone and damp earth and something else that none of them could name. The walls were solid. The ceiling held. They moved fast, flashlights cutting ahead, boots loud on the channel floor. Above them, through 2 meters of soil and concrete, the Dareth continued their bombardment pattern. The vibrations came down through the stone like a second heartbeat, steady and heavy. The Dareth were precise. They hit the same zones on a rotation, softening the ground above shelter access points, preparing to collapse the tunnels from above. According to the attack pattern Una had mapped, they were scheduled to hit Shelter 9's main tunnel in about 4 hours. The humans reached the secondary access point in 40 minutes. Faris looked at the wall. It was old, unreinforced concrete from the original colony construction. He looked at Una. She nodded. He placed 2 small charges, told everyone to step back, and brought the wall down cleanly. The smell that came through was stale air and fear, and 120 days of people living underground. There was silence for a moment on the other side. Then a voice spoke in Shalori, high and sharp with alarm. Then another voice, deeper, saying something that sounded like a command. Then nothing. Una stepped through the gap. Her translator was running. She said in flat, calm galactic standard, "UHF ground team, we received your signal. We're here to get you out." Another long silence. A figure appeared from the dark at the back of the shelter. 4 arms, wide flat eyes adapted for low light, skin the pale gray-green of deep water. Then, he looked at Una for a long moment, then at the hole in his shelter wall, then at the humans behind her. He said very quietly, "You came." "We came," Una said. He turned around and said something to the people behind him. There was a sound, a low collective exhale, like 400 people breathing out at once after holding it for a very long time. Corporal Mize was already moving through the gap with the medical kit. Dr. Oso came through right behind him, pulling on her gloves before she had fully cleared the wall. She looked at the shelter interior, at the people sitting along the walls and lying on the floor, at the number of them and the state of them, and she did not say anything. She just picked the nearest person in obvious distress and started working. She worked for 19 hours. She did not stop. She ate half a ration bar somewhere around hour 8 because Mize put it in her hand and she ate it without looking at it. She set bones with field splints. She treated burns. She managed 3 people who were in serious danger and kept all 3 of them stable. She trained 2 Shalori volunteers to assist her because there was too much work for one person and not enough for her to slow down. Ven watched her from across the shelter. He had expected soldiers. He had not expected a doctor who worked like the idea of stopping had never occurred to her. He went to Una when she had a moment. "The main access tunnel," he said. "The Dareth will hit it in a few hours." "I know," Una said. "We're not using the main tunnel." "Then how do we get 400 people to your extraction point?" Una showed him the map. A route through the drainage network, then a 2-block surface crossing through a district that the Dareth had already bombed and moved past, then a straight run to the landing zone. It was not a safe route. Every part of it had a problem, but it was the only route that avoided the 3 Dareth unit positions between them and the ship. Ven looked at the map, then he looked at her. "You planned this before you arrived." "I planned what I could," she said. "The rest we figure out as we go." He thought about that. In Shalori doctrine, you did not move until you knew every variable. The humans had arrived inside 10 hours of receiving the signal. There was no version of that where they had known every variable. "All right," he said. "Tell me what you need me to do." Corporal Mize had a habit of narrating his own actions when things got tense. Under his breath, barely a whisper. a running account of what he was doing and what came next. Yuna had noticed it on his third deployment and stopped finding it strange by the fifth. Some people counted, some people prayed. Mize talked himself through it. He was doing it now, moving at the back of the evacuation column with a rifle and a medical bag, helping a Shalori elder who could not walk without support. Moving through Sector 3, 40 meters to drainage entry, cover on the left side, keep pace, keep pace. Yuna heard him from 6 meters ahead and felt something ease slightly in her chest. If Mize was talking, Mize was fine. 400 people moved through the drainage channel in groups of 40, slow and loud in the way large groups of frightened people always are, no matter how hard they try to be quiet. Children did not understand what silence meant here. The wounded made sounds they could not help. The stone walls carried every noise and gave it back doubled. Above them, the Dareth adjusted. The hive mind did not experience confusion. What it experienced was a problem it could not solve with its existing models. Humans were moving underground through infrastructure the Dareth sensors had not mapped. They redirected 2 ground units toward the area where their models predicted the humans would surface. They predicted wrong. Faris had been planting charges along the route since they entered the drainage system, small devices set to timers he had calculated based on the Dareth scan cycle. When the first one went off, 3 blocks east of their actual position, both Dareth units moved toward it. By the time the Dareth units reached the blast site and understood they had been pulled in the wrong direction, the evacuation column was already surfacing in the bombed-out district and making the 2-block crossing. The crossing was the worst part. Open sky. No cover except the ruins on either side. The Dareth did not have eyes on them yet, but they would. Yuna pushed the pace as hard as she dared, moving the most vulnerable people first, keeping her team on the flanks. They were 70 meters from the landing zone when the Dareth found them. The first shot hit the wall beside Yuna's head. She had already moved. The squad returned fire, pushing the column forward, Faris on the rear with the last of his charges. Yuna took a hit in the upper arm, a glancing strike from a Dareth energy weapon that burned through her sleeve and left a long red mark across her skin. She registered it, filed it, kept moving. Ven was helping 2 survivors when he saw it happen. Yuna took the hit. She staggered 1 step, just one, and then straightened and kept directing the column with the same voice she had used for the last 6 hours. Shalori soldiers called for medical support and found cover. Yuna did neither. He filed it away. Mize got the last group of survivors moving toward the landing zone and then turned back to help a Shalori man who had fallen. He reached the man. He got him up. He was 3 steps from the landing zone perimeter when the Dareth shot that should have missed did not miss. Yuna heard it. She did not stop. She could not stop. She said Mize's name once into the comm, the way soldiers say the names of the dead, short and flat, a marker placed in the record. Then she kept moving because that was the job and the job was not done. Faris used his last 2 charges on the Dareth squad that was closing on the landing pad. The explosions were larger than they needed to be. That was always how Faris worked when it mattered most. The pad held. The Dareth unit did not advance further. The last survivors crossed the perimeter. The dropship doors closed. In orbit, Reyes had been managing the second wave of Dareth ships for 40 minutes with half a fleet. Captain Rowe told her at minute 38 that they could not hold both positions. She told him she needed 2 more minutes. He gave her 2 more minutes. The evacuation ship cleared atmosphere at minute 41. Reyes pulled the covering force back to the fleet. The Dareth second wave did not pursue. Their ground operation had failed and the orbital losses were too high. The hive calculation was simple. The cost of further engagement exceeded the value of the objective. They withdrew. On the dropship, Vin sat beside a small girl who had been crying since they boarded and had finally stopped. He was watching Yuna across the bay. She was sitting with her back against the hull wall, arm dressed by someone from her team, eyes open, staring at nothing. He knew that look. He had spent 6 days wearing it himself in Shelter 9. He crossed the bay and sat down next to her. She looked at him. He said, "You were hit, and you kept going." "The job wasn't done," she said. He thought about Mize. He thought about the way Una had said his name on the comm and then kept moving. He thought about what that cost and how she was sitting with it right now, quiet, not making a sound. "In my language," he said, "we have a word for continuing when you are afraid, but we do not have a word for continuing when you are in grief." Una looked at him. "We don't either," she said. "We just do it." He nodded slowly. He did not say anything else. Neither did she. The ship climbed toward the fleet, and below them, RFIV turned quietly in the dark. The official count came in 6 hours after the fleet broke orbit. 139,200 confirmed survivors evacuated from RFIV. The colony infrastructure was damaged but standing. The Dareth had stripped 2 agricultural storage facilities before the battle, but the main settlement and shelter network were intact. The Shalori government would be able to rebuild. Human losses: 1 destroyer, 23 ground personnel, including Corporal Mize. Ray stood in front of the crew manifest in her quarters and read every name. She did this after every operation. She had done it so many times that she had stopped counting how many names she had read. She read them because they deserved to be read, and because someone had to carry them, and because she had given the orders that put those people where they were. She read Mize's name last, then she went back to the bridge. Counselor Dreth requested a formal debrief 48 hours after the fleet returned to Anchorage Bravo. Reyes accepted. She gave him 20 minutes. He sat across from her on the comm screen with the careful posture of someone who had been rehearsing what to say. He told her that the Accord had serious concerns about unsanctioned human military deployment into non-Accord treaty space. He told her that the engagement with the Dareth could have broader consequences for Accord diplomatic relationships in the outer belt. He told her that the UHF's actions, while effective, set a precedent that the Accord could not formally endorse. Reyes let him finish. Then she said, "How many Accord ships responded to the RFIV SOS?" Dreth said nothing. "The signal was 4 days old when we received it," she said. "Your committee was still voting on whether to draft a motion to discuss intervention. 140,000 people. 4 days." She looked at him. "We deployed in 22 minutes. We went through a debris field your pilots won't enter, fought a Dareth fleet with half the ships we needed, lost people on the ground, and brought home 139,000 survivors. File whatever report you need to file. I'll be here when the next signal comes in." She closed the channel. Dreth sat with the dead screen for a long time. He had composed 4 versions of a formal protest over the last 48 hours and sent none of them. He kept coming back to the same number, 22 minutes. He had been in the Accord for 40 years. He knew how long it took to convene committees, to get approvals, to achieve the consensus the Accord needed before anything moved. It was not bureaucracy for its own sake, but 140,000 people could not wait for it. He deleted the protests. He wrote a different document instead, addressed to the full Accord Council, requesting a review of emergency response protocols for colony worlds in contested space. It cited RFIV as a case study. It noted that a non-Accord military force had responded to a distress signal faster and more effectively than any Accord mechanism, and asked what that meant. He sent it. On the Shalori homeworld, Venn submitted his formal account to the Accord Council 2 weeks after returning from RFIV. He had written it carefully, in the precise formal Shalori used for official documents. He described the attack, the shelter conditions, the 6 days of waiting. He described the moment the shelter wall came down and humans came through it. He wrote, "They were not what I expected. I expected soldiers. What I found was something harder to describe. They were loud. They moved fast and they argued with each other constantly, and their doctor worked until I thought she would collapse and then worked more. Their squad leader was wounded in the field and did not stop until everyone was on the ship. One of them did not come home. The others carried that without showing it, the way a stone carries weight quietly without complaint. He wrote, "I do not fully understand what humans are, but I know what they did. When the signal went out and the galaxy did not answer, they answered. I think the galaxy should know that." The document circulated. It was shared widely, first among Shalori communities, then across other species in the Accord network. Fleet Speaker Ario read it on the observation vessel during the transit home. He read it twice. He did not share his thoughts with anyone. 3 weeks after the fleet returned to Anchorage Bravo, a new signal came in. Rowe found it the same way he had found the first one, a cascade through the relay network, low power, automated, repeating on the civilian emergency band. He ran it through the translator. He checked the coordinates. He printed it out, walked 2 decks down, and knocked on Ray's door. She was at her desk, same lamp, same posture. She held out her hand without looking up. He gave her the sheet. She read it. A colony world non-human further out than Arith IV, no human presence in the region, no treaty connection to Earth, no political reason, under attack. She set the sheet down. "Warm up the drives," she said. Rowe nodded and went back to the bridge. On the Accord monitoring network, somewhere in the relay system, an analyst flagged a new human fleet movement and sent an alert to Counselor Dreth. Dreth read the alert. He looked at the timestamp. He looked at how long the new SOS signal had been transmitting. 14 minutes. He closed the alert and went back to his work. He had stopped being surprised. He was not sure that was a bad thing.